How do you know God's will for you? I know this is probably the universal question for all of us if we really step back. When you ask God for guidance, how do you know His will? And this is from Monique. And again, it gets back to that somewhat discernment of trying to understand when one is open and asking God for guidance. How do I know when I'm really getting that guidance?
Yeah, I would just do the following things, Monique, just right up front. What's good for your salvation is God's will for you. So the first thing you know is if you're seeking something that's not going to be good for your salvation, and you can sort of, after a while, you can begin to sort of figure out what's going to be good, what's going to be bad. Sometimes we can rationalize and talk ourselves into thinking, boy, if I go to Harvard, that would be really good for my salvation. I'll be so much better equipped, right, to do so many good things with powers of articulation from such good professors. But maybe not. Maybe God knows something we don't know. Maybe it's not going to Harvard that's going to help you towards your salvation. Maybe going to another place like St. Thomas University or something could help you towards your salvation better. So the first thing you got to realize is God's always looking out for your salvation. Second thing to realize is that God's looking out for the salvation of all the people you're going to touch. And you're going to touch a lot of people now and in the future, and people you don't even know you're touching, right? So God's looking out for them too. The third thing to notice is God's never going to undermine your freedom, and He's never going to undermine the freedom of people around you. So He's always going to protect your freedom. So God's not going to be going on the get Hitler plan, right? So right. Hitler's going to do all these terrible, that guy's gone. He's toast. So he's going to cause a lot of suffering. I got him now. So God's going to let human freedom play out, even for Hitler and Stalin. People don't get lobotomized ahead of time if they're going to do something wrong. Because if God started doing that, you wouldn't be free anymore, right? You go, whoa, look what happened to Hitler and Stalin. And they were just thinking about doing evil. I'm going to get my act together. So God can't do that. So those are the first four things. Then the alleviation of your suffering and the alleviation of others' suffering. Now, what's my point? My point is, boy, there's so many factors involved in your salvation, others' salvation, protecting your freedom, protecting others' freedom, alleviating your suffering, alleviating others' suffering. And He's trying to orchestrate this for the entire world of human beings, right? And all the interconnections of it. We can't possibly know that. So we are going to have to do something else. We can't naturally know that because there's just too many factors. We got to wait for the Holy Spirit to manifest Himself. And generally the Holy Spirit manifests Himself in three different ways. And of course you have to kind of discern it. But number one, the Holy Spirit manifests Himself through the church. So the first thing we got to do is really have to try and learn what the church is teaching and what Jesus is saying in the Gospels, and so that's going to be a huge and important factor. Number two, the second thing we need to do is people can just say things, and you might just go, wow, that's a really important insight, and all of a sudden you're almost enchanted by this insight, or you're almost fixed by it, right? You just think, gosh, and you start running with it. Believe me, that's called inspiration. Now, you might have heard that insight from a friend of yours who you might have just thought was lights out. But who knows?
Right.
With the Holy Spirit, that guy could say something, or you could be watching the television, and you could be seeing, some political figure who you think is lights out, and all of a sudden some comment happens, and all of a sudden you feel this thing galvanized inside yourself, where you just go, there's something important here. There's something about this. There's something I need to follow on to. And then if you start dreaming about it, or then after you start dreaming about it, it comes back to you again and again, and all of a sudden, you start, coincidences start happening. You run into various kinds of things that start reinforcing this idea, what I call the vast conspiracy of divine providence, right? All of a sudden, these coincidences, which are not coincidence, start kind of reinforcing this idea that you find fascinating. You're being led, you're being inspired, you're being guided, absolutely. And of course, so Ignatius says, okay, if we're going to figure this out, okay, this enchantment, this fascination, this energy that comes interiorly, and all this vast conspiracy of divine providence, which kind of reinforces it exteriorly. How do you really know that's an inspiration from God or it's an inspiration from the devil? The first thing to do, as I said in the previous segment, is just do this. Look if there's an increase in trust in your life, trust in God in your life. If there is, pretty good chance it's from God, and He's leading you in a godly way, and it's through the Holy Spirit. If there's a decrease in trust, beware. Beware that you could have been deceived. Number two, if there's an increase in hope in your salvation, okay, probably comes from God. If there's a decrease, probably not. And finally, is there an increase in the spontaneous ability to love? Right? So go to 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, love is merciful, doesn't grow angry, doesn't get irritated, doesn't boast, right? But doesn't rejoice in what is bad in people, but rejoice in what is good. So if you find yourself saying, it's getting a little easier for me to be patient and to be kind and to be merciful and not boasting and not, growing angry and so forth. But if you find the opposite, and you go, ever since I, started following this kind of inspiration, I found that I'm much more impatient, much more unkind, much more unmerciful, much more uncharitable, and much more proud, much more angry, much more boastful, and so forth. Beware, not beware, put on the brakes, because St. Ignatius would say there's something wrong with that inspiration. That is not an inspiration from the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit always wants an increase in trust, hope, and love. It's the evil one who wants a decrease in trust, a decrease in hope to the point of despair, and a decrease in love. That's what he's looking for. So, of course, he wants to deceive you in any way that he can. So just 3 steps then. Take, just when that moment of, you're just hit by an expression, you're hit by something, a decision, an opportunity, something that somebody says, and then you find it reinforced by the vast conspiracy of divine providence. The fascination continues, and so forth and so on. Next step, test the spirits, as St. Paul tells us, right? Take a look. Increase in trust, hope, and love, or decrease in trust, hope, and love. And if there's an increase, keep following it, because you're being guided by the Holy Spirit. You're being guided. And if it's not, a decrease in trust, hope, and love, stop following it, adjust it, or abandon it altogether.